Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk about the growing strategic partnership between India and Afghanistan. It is very clear that India is trying to improve its outreach to Afghanistan. India is trying to engage the Taliban more aggressively and more intimately now than it did in the past year or so. So why this sudden change? Why is India suddenly accommodating Afghanistan? In the last 1 week, a new consul representing the Taliban has arrived in Mumbai. India is one of the few countries, like I think Iran, Russia, and China, who have allowed the Taliban to take over Afghan embassies in their countries. So there is clearly a cozying up to Afghanistan that is taking place. So in this conversations, I'm going to discuss 12 points that I think may help us understand India-Afghanistan relations. So bear with me. I will talk about what India's interests are in Afghanistan, and I will also talk about how this relationship will benefit Afghanistan. So I'm going to look at it from both sides, from the Indian side as well as from the Afghan side, and I might make some comments about the international perspective to this rapprochement, you could say, or growing Indian outreach to Afghanistan. But before that, do subscribe to the channel. Please make sure you ring the bell icon, like this video, and share it with other people. Usually, we try to provide a unique perspective on conversations. We try to look deeper than what the press is looking at. And we also try to debunk some of the myths that continue to masquerade as analysis in discussions about geopolitics in South Asia. So it's important that our message reaches more and more people. So please help us with that. And by subscribing to the channel, by liking the video, and by sharing this with others, that is how you can help us. So let's begin. So India's Foreign Secretary, Mr. Misri, which means one step below the Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar. The current Modi administration does not have ministers of state who deal with foreign policy. Sometimes we have two ministers, the cabinet minister and a state level minister. So you have Dr. Jaishankar, and then the next in line in terms of authority and power is the Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Mr. Misri. He met Amir Khan Muttaqi, the acting Foreign Minister of Afghanistan. You must have noticed that the Taliban have appointed several ministers, but for the last 2 or 3 years, they all have been interim or acting. So he met Mr. Muttaqi in Dubai, and they had very serious high-level talks. There are photographs, etc., out there. So there are two effects. That one, India is reaching out to the Taliban at the second highest level. The next highest level would be between heads of states. So or at least the foreign minister of India meeting the foreign minister of Afghanistan. But they're meeting publicly. They met in Dubai, and so it is not some secret engagement with Afghanistan and Taliban. You must also be aware that the Taliban government has not been recognized by anybody at all so far. Zero recognition. Even India has not recognized, even though India has more engagement with the Taliban than most countries. The only other countries who seem to have similar engagement are Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan. But anyway, let's begin by talking about what are the issues that are driving India's interest. Number one, India has invested over $3 billion in Afghanistan. During the period when the United States was occupying Afghanistan and the international community was engaged with Afghanistan, trying to build a democracy in Afghanistan, India invested $3 billion, including building a new parliament building for Afghanistan. So India has serious investments in Afghanistan, and why would it want to lose those? So it continues to have relations with the Taliban, who it is very clear that the Taliban are now entirely in charge of Afghanistan. They have been so since the United States left Afghanistan in August 2021, and they have stabilized Afghanistan. There's less domestic violence. Less occasional acts of terrorism do take place. but they have stabilized the country, and it seems that they are exercising sovereignty over Afghanistan. So while the government is not recognized, it is de facto sovereign in Afghanistan. So there's no option. But if you have to deal with Afghanistan, you have to deal with the Taliban. So the India basically does not want to forego all the investments that it has made. There are some projects that are still ongoing and which haven't been completed. And so India wants to continue to have these investments in Afghanistan, building infrastructure. And what it does is investment in healthcare, especially humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, medicines, etc. Education. India has invested in providing scholarships to Afghan students. All of this gives India a leverage in Afghanistan, and Afghan governments obviously need this. The Taliban need this. So India does not want to completely divest itself of Afghanistan. So number one, India has $3 billion worth of investments, which is quite a large amount of investments for India. And so they don't want to lose it. So they want to continue to leverage that in Afghanistan. And so they are re-engaging with the Taliban. In fact, in the last 2 years, India has maintained a small technical committee which continues to be present in Kabul and engages with Afghanistan. Number two, India has security interests from Afghanistan, and they want to ensure that there are no anti-India extremist groups, terrorist groups, or jihadi groups that take root inside Afghanistan and then harass India and also play a role in Indian Kashmir. So that is another important role, important ask that India has from the Taliban government. In the first time when the Taliban were in charge, they did allow anti-India extremist groups to thrive, have camps, train, etc. But this time around, I think Afghanistan has done a reasonably good job of suppressing, except for Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. They have tried to really suppress other groups occasionally. ISIS, Khorasan does explode bombs and suicide bombers in it, but they have put a lid on Al-Qaeda to a great extent. So in that sense, the international community should be grateful to the Taliban because they have reduced international terrorism coming out of Afghanistan. And they have also ensured that there aren't any anti-India groups operating openly in Afghanistan. So India does have clear security asks of Afghanistan, and it wants to continue to engage with them. And while the Taliban also have great interests, I will talk about that in the second part of this discussion. So there is something transactional there. You provide us with what we need for our security, we will provide you with what you need for your development. So the second issue is that India wants to continue to engage the Taliban so they do not encourage anti-India extremist groups from thriving there. Number three, for the lot of people have recognized this fact that Afghanistan has often given Pakistan a strategic depth. For those of you who understand cricket, it's like saying, if you're forced to play on the back foot, like if you're facing a fast bowler who's throwing bouncers at you and you want to play on the back foot, you move back to play the ball. So for Pakistan, if it was under assault from India, Afghanistan would provide it with strategic depth from where it could engage India militarily. So India's engagement with Afghanistan, with Taliban, essentially is trying to cut off that strategic depth. The Pakistan government's designed to create a proxy government in Kabul, which will pursue. It's like saying that what Assad's regime was to Iran and Russia, the Pakistanis wanted Afghan Taliban to be for Pakistan, that you have a country whose government is so beholden to you that it advances your interests rather than its own interests. But the Taliban, after coming to power, immediately basically tried to become autonomous of Pakistan. And in fact, in the last 1 month, you saw that there are military action taking place between the two countries. And so for India, this is very critical because if they keep Pakistan occupied on its western border, then it does not have the bandwidth to harass India on the India-Pakistan border, which is on the east of Pakistan. So the more Pakistan is obsessed and engaged on its western border, the better it is for India from a strategic military point of view. So the Taliban allowing Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, to harass Pakistan is basically tables turned. This is what used to happen earlier. Pakistan used to support terrorist groups which would harass India out of Afghanistan, and now you have terrorist groups in Afghanistan who are harassing Pakistan. So that is from very broadly, it's like saying my enemy's enemy is my friend kind of logic is applicable here. So India is quite happy with that particular scenario because it it drains Pakistan's military energy resources, especially when its economy is in doldrums at the moment. So for India, keeping Pakistan engaged on the western border is of great strategic importance. Number four, Afghanistan is critical for India's access to Central Asia. India has been trying for the past 10 years to increase its trade and its influence in Central Asia. India is very invested in Central Asia, but it's competing with Russia and China and Iran and Turkey in that region. And one of India's problems is that it does not have direct access to Central Asia. It is trying to reach to Central Asia via Iran through the Chabahar port, where India has invested heavily in it, and through the Chabahar port, through Afghanistan, it hopes to reach out to Central Asian countries. But you must also realize that to some extent, Iran is a competitor with the US when it comes to influence in Central Asia. So Afghanistan is critical for India's access to Central Asia. It's kind of reverse of the United States. Central Asia is critical for the US to basically surround and monitor Afghanistan. For India, it's the opposite. Afghanistan is critical to India's access to Central Asia. Number five, there is clearly growing Chinese influence in Afghanistan. China has already invested over $150 million in the past 2-3 years after the withdrawal of the US. China is trying to basically invest in the mining sector. In the past, there were attacks on Chinese businessmen who were investing there by ISIS, but the Taliban have been able to stabilize, like I said, their country. So India does not want to be left behind. So it is trying to combat China's growing influence there. China is trying to basically increase its influence and its economic and soft power in all South Asian countries. China has great influence in Bangladesh, in Maldives, in Pakistan, also to some extent in Nepal and Bhutan, and India is basically trying to compete and balance China's growing influence in the entire South Asian region. And so Afghanistan is part of the region, and so India has to engage. It has no choice. If it does not engage with the Taliban, China has no problem engaging with them, and so China's influence will grow there. So India is also competing there, China. Similarly, the point number 6 that I want to make is that there are other countries also which are influencing in both, reaching out to both the Taliban as well as the opposition. That Iran has significant influence, Turkey has influence, Russia and Qatar are also quite influential. Besides Pakistan, even though Pakistan is currently going through a terrible time there, but its relations with the Taliban are very deep. Taliban could not have survived for 20 years without Pakistan's financial, military, and strategic support. So it does continue to have some goodwill, even though right now it's losing it very fast. So India does not want to be left behind as other countries, especially Turkey, Qatar, Russia, China, increase their influence in Afghanistan. It's like the old great game when the imperial powers like Russia and Britain were competing for influence in Afghanistan. And so we can see that there is, at a small level, the new great game beginning with Afghanistan as the battleground. Number 7 is a point that I want to make is very critical because India likes to promote itself as the mother of democracy, the largest democracy in the world, the biggest elections in the world, and so on and so forth. So while India is trying to promote itself as a country that believes in democratic values, its engagement with Taliban becomes quite hypocritical. India has not condemned Taliban's treatment of women, even though it is part of the international community which demands, basically it has 3 demands of Afghanistan for recognition: that the government in Afghanistan become more inclusive, that means the other ethnic groups which exists there besides the Pashtuns are part of the government, like those Uzbeks and the Tajiks and the Shia, but that has not happened. Number two, Afghanistan Taliban basically shut down on terrorism, which they have done a reasonably good job on ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And number three, that they extend rights to women. So while Prime Minister Modi at home talks a lot about Beti Bachao and investments in this sister, that sister, Pyari Behna, and all those welfare schemes to empower women in India, the Indian government has not done much for women in Afghanistan who probably have never suffered as much in their entire history as they are under the current government, which is now even banning windows to houses so that women cannot see outside and they cannot be seen from outside. I mean, this is like mind-boggling. It's like a twilight zone when it comes to women's values. But India seems to have no problems with how Taliban treats the women in school. So there's a bit hypocritical. India will say, "Oh, we are trying to pursue our national interests." Well, good. So then don't talk about being a mother of democracy and Vishwa Guru, and we want to teach the world how to be an inclusive government. So there is a element of hypocrisy, and some analysts, I was reading, some Indian analysts believe that the reason why India is slow to engage the Taliban as opposed to China and Russia is because of the fact that India is a democracy, Russia and China are not. Exactly. So you could argue that if India did not project itself as a mother of democracy and the world's largest democracy, perhaps India would have maybe already recognized the Taliban. There is also this story, this is number 8, in the story that Pakistan, that India is using TTP to kill anti-India extremists who are residing in Pakistan. So there are lots of stories about transnational repression, that there are Taliban-related people going around killing India's enemies in Pakistan, and all of this is being orchestrated through Dubai and Afghanistan. So this is part of the covert arrangement. So there is some stuff on it you can see in the Washington Post and others. And I think that if India is doing that, then having good relations with Taliban becomes necessary, because without having good relations with the Taliban, I don't think they will be able to reach out to TTP and engage them as they are accused of doing. But I also want, and this is my number 9 point about Afghanistan, there's a lot of talk about how India and Afghanistan have great historical ties. People say, oh, we have great historical ties, and they move on. What are these historical ties? Well, it's very interesting. One of the things that BJP does at home is to foster hatred towards Muslims in India by talking about invaders. Well, Babur, who invaded India, was the king of Kabul for 20 years before he came to India. So that is historical connections. The Mughals came from Afghanistan and Central Asia. Then you have the Lodhi, the Lodhi Empire that was replaced by Babur was also an Afghan. Sher Shah Suri was an Afghan. When Babur became king of Delhi and emperor of Delhi and established the Mughal Empire, he had Afghans on his right in Afghanistan, and he had Afghans on his left in Bihar and Bengal. So the Afghans were ruling much of India for a long time. And then Afghans came back, this famous third battle of Panipat, where Ahmad Shah Abdali came and basically broke the back of the Maratha Empire. So yes, there is a long history of India-Afghanistan relations, and not to forget Ranjit Singh, whose Sikh empire and kingdom was mostly anchored in what is Afghanistan today. Perhaps you could argue that the only foreigner, non-Afghan or non-Muslim, who conquered Afghanistan and governed it was Ranjit Singh, because lots of Central Asians, including Babur, came from Central Asia and conquered Afghanistan and ruled. It's only the Americans and the British and the Russians who were humiliated when they tried to occupy and govern Afghanistan. So number 9, my point is that, yes, there's a long history that India is willing to overlook that show that, okay, at least when it comes to foreign policy, India is more pragmatic. So it's more pragmatic when it deals with Muslims abroad, while it is hateful and ideological when it deals with Muslims at home. Now let's look at the same thing from the Afghan point of view. Why is it Afghanistan? First, number 1, Afghanistan government, the Taliban, are completely isolated. Nobody recognizes, even the Pakistani government has not officially recognized them. So that must be a sore point for them, that we are the rulers of Afghanistan, but nobody recognizes us. They are not allowed to sit at the United Nations. They can't represent them, Afghanistan at many conferences. In fact, many times there have been conferences on Afghanistan where the Afghan government, the Taliban, was not even invited, even among countries who engage them, such as Russia and other places in Qatar. So for them, engaging with India at such a high level, where the foreign minister of Afghanistan, the acting foreign minister, meets the foreign secretary of India, the Misri Muttaqi summit, clearly gives a lot of recognition and legitimacy to the Taliban. It's like when nobody was going to play cricket in Pakistan, and then when one of the foreign teams came, I think it was Zimbabwe, everybody in Pakistan was thrilled. Finally, cricket has come back. So it's something like that, but on a much bigger and serious level. The Taliban are delighted that an important country like India, the biggest democracy in the world, the fifth biggest economy, is willing to engage with them. It is a recognition. So just by talking to them, India is doing a huge favor to the Taliban. The second thing is it needs India's help. Afghanistan is going through a humanitarian crisis. It needs India's help. It needs medicines from India. It needs food from India. It wants to send its students to India to study. It needs visas, etc. So there is a tremendous, shall we say, need for financial aid and support from India. And India is willing to provide that. And so whatever India needs in exchange, such as the security guarantees, I'm sure the Taliban are willing to provide that to India. I'm surprised that they don't have that kind of relationship with Pakistan. Why can't Pakistan provide the benefits that Afghanistan is seeking in exchange for which it can shut down TTP? Well, that is for the Pakistani analysts to think about it. Finally, the projects that India started, as I pointed out in the beginning, that India has already invested over $3 billion in infrastructure in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan would like India to invest more, and for that they need engagement. So this meeting is very critical for them. I'm sure they must have talked about India's infrastructure investments in Afghanistan. The Afghanistan foreign minister, Muttaqi, called India a significant regional partner. And so what is interesting is that the Taliban are using their engagement with India and projecting their closeness to India as a source of their soft power, that we are legitimate, we are important, we are now a legitimate government because an important country like India is engaging. So in that sense, you could say this is the quid pro quo. I don't know what else the Afghan wants. These are the three things that I think 10, 11, 12 points in this presentation where the Afghanistan government, the Taliban government is excited, thrilled to engage with India. The United States has been engaging the Taliban, at least on the counterterrorism issues. The Europeans have not engaged Afghanistan that much, except for the refugee issues. So at the moment, those countries which are more part of BRICS who are engaged with the Taliban. In fact, I think Afghanistan is on track to become a member of SCO at least, and maybe perhaps also BRICS, but that's not going to happen until the Taliban government is recognized as the government of Afghanistan. So far, nobody has done that, but as I said, there are some countries which are allowing the Taliban to use Afghan embassies like Russia, China, Turkey, Qatar, India, and Iran. So anyway, we will see what happens further, but this is a very close partnership between India and Afghanistan, as similar to what India had with Bangladesh during the time of Sheikh Hasina, can be a game changer in South Asian politics. But once again, as in Bangladesh, India has to compete with China for influence in Afghanistan. Anyway, I hope you found these 12 points about India-Afghan relations interesting, thought-provoking, and stimulating. So please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.